Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 305, and we're going to talk about Machiavelli in the Trump House, and then talk about Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. being confirmed. So I talked about Machiavelli a couple of times before. Let's see, in episode 60, at the ends justify the means, and episode 247, well-used cruelty. But just to review, in case you don't want to go back and listen to those early episodes, which I think were formatted a lot, at least episode 60 was formatted to be a much, much longer episodes. But anyway, Machiavelli lived in the early 1500s, and in the early 1500s, he had written The Prince. The world was changing. Columbus discovered Haiti, and people started going to North and South America, to explore for lots of interesting things. They tried to basically pillage and plunder all of those areas. But anyway, so the world was getting much, much bigger. And Machiavelli writes The Prince because European societies, they're no longer dying because of all of these plagues and diseases. And so the population is beginning to grow, and governments are beginning to be a little bit more stable. And so he writes The Prince. The Prince is one translation, but really it's the ruler. Okay. And the book that he wrote, really, it was an essay that he attached to a job application, but I go into it, I think, in episode 60. But in 1559, a few years after he writes it, the Pope bans it. Now, the real interesting thing is, I don't think it was originally written to be distributed and read by a wide audience. It was meant to be for, eyes only, for a couple of people to see, but somehow it gets out. Maybe Machiavelli, in his frustration, because he didn't get the job, released it to a wider audience. And it was a threat to the Pope and governments all over. And so that's why the Pope banned it. And because it was a work, a piece of literature about statecraft, how governments work and why they work in the way that they do. And so basically it was like a magician revealing how he does his tricks. And so that's supposed to be secret insider information. You don't let, the little people, the commoners, the peasants know what's going on. And so the word that he would use for politics was statecraft, and I've been hearing that word a lot more. And I think it's interesting that, you would say statecraft and no one knew what you were talking about. But it essentially means politics, international politics, politics on a much larger scale and level. So a couple of things that Machiavelli would assume is that the common person, the common voter, is fickle and inconstant. And so therefore, as a politician, as a leader, you got to be sly, right? You have to be able to do what you need to do, but sort of realize that the people can turn on you on a dime. And so how do you maintain power? And so that's the basic point of the book, is that Machiavelli is showing or demonstrating or trying to prove that he knows how to keep a prince in power, right? So he's not overthrown, the people don't rise up and try to kill him, etc. And so one of the ideas that's kind of prominent that comes out in the book is you have to exercise well-used cruelty. In other words, you can't just be openly cruel and appear to be sadistic, enjoying all of the pain and suffering that you're imposing, for this cruelty to seem to have no rhyme or reason, but you have to use it well. Now, well-used cruelty back in the day meant killing all of your enemies, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that today, although yes, people tried to take out Trump, in Butler, PA, and elsewhere. But you these days, at least once you attain office, apparently the road that Trump is taking is to get them fired or remove them from their posts or offer them early retirement, whatever, get them out of government that way, and you got to do it right away. You got to do it quickly, right? That's well-used cruelty. You don't, you know, go slow, a slow rollout, so that the whole time you're in office, you're kicking people out of government. That's not how you do it. You got to do it all at once. Like, I heard someone use the word blitzkrieg, interestingly, since it is a World War II German strategy. Nevertheless, you have to basically go ham. You got to just go nuts, bonkers with what you need to do all at once, as fast as you can in the beginning of your term. That way, the remainder of your term, you get to spend building your legacy, doing great things for the people. Now, arguably, among the executive orders that he has already signed, a lot of these things are meant to be good for the people, such as not allowing biological men to compete in women's sports, because you know that there is a very, very serious physical danger to the women because they're built differently. Once in a while, you will have a woman who can compete with some of the men, but generally speaking, men and women are just simply built differently, and they shouldn't be in the same ring for boxing or for some of these other physical competitions. And so he is all at once trying to not only get rid of all of his opposition, his enemies, but at the same time doing a lot of the things that he said he would do, which is pleasing lots of people too, right? And so it is a very serious priority to get rid of all of the people who obstructed him the first time around. And the main lesson of Machiavelli is that when you do all of this stuff, you have to avoid hatred. Now, coming into the office, Trump is already hated by lots of people, TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. And I really believe that it is real. I didn't want to believe it. I just thought that people were making fun of other people, but seeing how it is playing out, even among some people that I know, it really is a derangement. The inability to be able to process, the reality of what's happening and to be fixate only on minor details is something to behold. It really is. So, what is working in Trump's favor is the devotion of a tremendous number of people. For my own part, I'm not devoted to, I'm not a MAGA person. I'm not a fanatic. And that's primarily because I focus on principles, not issues, right? And so for the vast majority of people in the United States, it's all about the issue. And I've talked about that dynamic, focusing on issues versus focusing on principles several times. I think I even have an episode with that title. And it's very easy that if you focus on specific issues like women in sport, men in sports, and DEI, right? If you focus on very specific issues, the danger of falling into hypocrisy or contradicting yourself is extremely high, if not likely, right? And if you didn't notice that it existed, it's because you haven't really thought about it too much. So, in order to avoid all of the contradiction and hypocrisy, you have to have a good, sound principle. Holding to the principle, deferring to the principle will help you steer clear of all contradiction and hypocrisy. And I keep repeating, hypocrisy is the root of all injustice. And avoiding injustice is the best way to avoid hatred. Now, so that's the Machiavelli component, and this sort of shock and awe approach that Trump is employing is really extremely impressive. I think this is the only way that he can get things done. Now, I saw a episode, the Wednesday episode of Judge Napolitano with Gerald Celente. Gerald Celente does the Trends in the News podcast, right? And and they were actually quite upset. And the reason is because some of the things that, if not all of the things, that the method by which Trump is doing all of this stuff is unconstitutional. In other words, it's illegal. It's not according to procedure. And there is a way to do everything that Trump is, proposing to do, but it's a much slower way. In other words, doing it legally by the book poses, presents other kinds of problems. In other words, the fear is, of course, that if you do it illegally in this way by executive order, it just simply sets up the next person. When the pendulum swings back the other way, uh, then who's to say that person, by the stroke of a pen, undoes everything that Trump does? And so that's why I said it's very important that as Trump does it right, so that his successor, whoever comes after him, will be able to continue this sort of maintaining the trajectory of having a smaller government, right? At least for like 20 years. And that will make it very hard for another person to come along and just simply eradicate or invalidate, uh, repeal everything that Trump has done. And that is something kind of quite interesting. So that is the future problem. However, um, you know, if he doesn't do this, would he be able to do it? Like if he did it by the law, I think there would be so many different ways for Democrats and rhinos to oppose what Trump is trying to do. And it would be just so frustrating and so maddening. And so doing it this way, the shock and awe, there are several benefits, as I mentioned before. Democrats just simply do not know which battle to fight. Having said that, everything that he's said pretty much with regard to Israel and Ukraine seems to be a dropping of the ball, right? It doesn't, it's like, wow, really uncomfortable, not what he promised. So it's a little bit frustrating there. But there are a lot of unknowns, right? There's a lot of things, which because it's national secret, whatever, we don't know. And so what Trump is actually up to is unknown. I am made a little bit uncomfortable. I'm hoping that if the United States is in charge of the cleanup, that they don't let Israel in there because part of the cleanup will be to remove all of the tunnels that Hamas was using to basically sneak around underground and ambush Israeli soldiers. So, there's that. And so, in other words, there are a lot of suspicions, like a lot of, why would you want to do that kind of thing? So, it remains to be seen how all of this plays out. And I mentioned the other day, USAID, it's coming down, at least it seems to be. And that is the propaganda wing of the government. And so, if you don't have that, is it possible to continue everything that's happening in the Middle East, in Ukraine, and in Israel? And so, because I don't know enough, I'll just encourage you to be a little bit patient. Hopefully, it's because the military industrial complex is so massive that he has to sort of lead them on a little bit before he actually, moves forward with what he's planning to do there. I'm hoping anyway. And Netanyahu, you can't trust him, right? But today, of course, Trump had to walk back his occupation of Gaza or owning Gaza statement. How far he walked it back, I just watched a couple clips, but um, it remains to be seen. Like if everything blows up in his face, then obviously I think he's just going to change tack and then just maybe pull out completely. That would be optimal. Except to change his mind without the blow up and death and mayhem. So again, doing it by the book, right, following the law, would just simply take too long. And do this shock and awe approach keeps everyone who opposes him off balance, right? So the Democrats, you know, taking a stand on USAID, right? It outs themselves, right? They are because at the same time you get on X and other platforms people talking about just the ridiculous things that were being funded by USAID, and then you have Democrats protesting the closure of USAID. I mean, who would? I mean, if you had half a brain, then you'd realize that they're defending corruption. They're defending, uh, you know, regime change all over the world. They are funding all of the things that they said was evil and accused Trump of doing the last time he was president. And so it's just so weird to me. It's just so odd how they hold on to lies that just don't work, that didn't work. Calling Trump a fascist, going after Musk in that way. The world is a different place from 4 years ago, right? Now that Musk had bought Twitter. And so it's interesting how they keep pushing the same things that just did not work last time. And it came out that USAID was funding the BBC of all things, right? Politico, Reuters, these news agencies are big. And I thought, wow, is it that many people that enjoy and believe everything that the BBC, Politico, and Reuters is putting out there? And it turns out, no, they're not, right? Politico has double-digit subscribers, not subscribers in the millions. It's just simply like 20 or something like that, a really low number. And Reuters, which I always thought was flagship news reporting, was also subsidized by USAID. And I always wondered, I mean, who would follow and consume this kind of news uh, that was obviously propaganda, right? It always was a mystery to me, and it turns out that no, they don't have many supporters at all. And everything was propped up by USAID, not just overseas in Ukraine, where 9 out of 10 of the news agencies were basically mouthpieces for the CIA, but here in the United States as well. So it's nice to see uh, that when you go wake up in the morning and you look at your feed, your news feed, that you smile a little bit. I mean, dismantling of the empire, that's, how can you not be pleased by that? Now, as I already mentioned, not all of it is good. I mean, I do get sad when I see some of the things that Trump had said with regard to, war. But in the last few years, there is nothing that could bring a smile to your face unless you looked away from your news feed and tried to enjoy life itself. But now you can look at the news feed and, the all of the deceit and lies and cover-ups are being revealed. Everything that you suspected was shady for the last 8 years is now being revealed. And so that's a feel-good moment. These are feel-good opportunities. I'm looking at the books at the USAID. Now you're going to audit the Treasury. Perhaps we're getting closer to an audit of the Fed, right? And finally, just to close things up, Tulsi Gabbard and RFK both confirmed, or at least they crossed the hardest hurdle today, the Senate confirmation, I guess. And so whatever is left, I don't really rightly know, maybe just simply formality. And hopefully, now that Tulsi Gabbard is confirmed, she will be able to give Trump more accurate information now on the Middle East, Ukraine, and Israel. I have mentioned before that, just by anecdote, that some learning problems of kids today, which were really, really rare, like you only saw it in the movies, now is pretty commonplace. Dyslexia, for example. So learning difficulties is, I think, has exploded, right? Because I never knew anyone or even knew someone who had dyslexia. And just in my small school, there are a number, and other students know other people who are struggling with that kind of problem. And, this is health related. Why is there such an explosion? It would be nice if someone were to take a look at that. And I think RFK Jr., a lot of people want him to be able to take a look at that. And so it'd be cool if someone did. I might have mentioned before that in Japan, there are no required vaccinations, none, zero, zippo, yet. Um, the infant mortality rate is much, much, much higher. Like I think the United States is number 26 and like the dead last in the developed country infant mortality, like they're among the worst. And Japan is number one, right? In terms of lowest infant mortality, Japan, which requires zero jabs, have a much, much lower infant mortality rate than the United States, which has what, like 70, I heard, 75, infant jabs that you're supposed to take. Now, as much as Japan doesn't have requirement, I am sure it's because there's competition among companies. And so if you want to have I don't know, a mumps shot, there'll be several companies that are offering their uh, their shot, and they make plain like they're trying to get people to use their product, and so they'll advertise the ingredients, they'll advertise the side effects, the percentage of side effects, et cetera, et cetera. And so people are better informed with the jabs that they're going to take. There's less deception, right? Especially like with the HPV shot, where everyone is being told that it's the most awesomest thing ever, but there are issues with it, right? And so instead of blindly taking shots, Japanese people are forced to do more research, which I think leads to a lot of people saying, yeah, I don't need that. Um, so I just watched Elizabeth Pocahontas Warren and RFK Jr.'s exchange. She talks about thin profits in the pharmaceutical companies. Yet I remember that Congress used to complain about the tremendous high, greedy profits of pharmaceutical companies. So what happened to that? And then I also thought that vaccines were redefined to get away from lawsuits. In other words, if they came out with a drug that was supposed to help with cerveza, okay, then they're open to being sued. But if it was a vaccine for cerveza, then they can't get sued. And so I think they changed the definition to be able to put more drugs under the vaccine label, which then allows them to escape liability far more easily than before. And at least we have a better functioning justice system now, so that when people start threatening the lives of Doge workers, at least they'll be investigated instead of people saying, well, he is a bad guy. Musk is a bad guy. So of course he's going to have death threats, instead of having that kind of weak, answer or response to people making death threats. I mean, cyber bullying at high schools are a much, much lower bar. So I would think that threatening someone's life should, be a much easier trigger, right? A much lower bar than that. All right, just some things to think about. A lot of things happening once again every day, so many different things. And so I'm just trying to give some perspective, some ways to think about it, and try to, celebrate the things that have been going on, because I really do think that this is much, much better than what we would have had under a President Harris. So enjoy the rest of your day and talk to you guys next time.